All right. Well, hey, I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of these slides. Let me just share my screen here. Make sure you guys can see that. And then I'm also, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and just see how I can do this. One second. Stop sharing. Well, what I was going to do was I was going to mute for just a little bit. Oh, here we go. I can do this here. Just so that in case there's any background noise. All right. And then I'll open it up for a time of Q&A. We can kind of, can you guys see my screen? Yeah? All right. So, and you guys see the welcome slide now? Perfect. Thank you. It's helpful. Well, guys, welcome. Really glad, really excited to be able to do this kind of little info session webinar, talk a little bit about the City to City Incubator. This has really been several years in the making. I'll give you just a kind of a quick and dirty little history of how City to City Miami came to be. So here in Miami, there's a church called Crossbridge Church. They're part of the PCA. And Felipe Assis was invited by a guy named Terry Geiger. Terry Geiger is the guy who actually helped Tim Keller start the Redeemer Church Planting Network up in New York. And he, back in the early 70s, he planted this church called Emmanuel. Well, as a lot of churches end up doing over the years, Emmanuel found themselves in kind of a predicament where they were getting ready to just sell the property and close the church down. Keller and Terry Geiger called Felipe down in Brazil and said, hey, we have an opportunity for you to replant a church here in Miami. Would you consider it? And so in 2008, Emmanuel Presbyterian Church became Crossbridge Church. And Crossbridge Church has now done 3 revitalizations of 3 different Presbyterian churches here in Miami and 1 church plant in Brickell. And in 2013, I moved back to Miami. In 2015, I started partnering with Felipe here at Crossbridge, and then with the purpose of launching City to City Miami, because one of the things that Redeemer City to City had realized was that they were doing training of church planners and coaching church planners around the world in a lot of major global city centers, but they weren't doing it in North America anywhere outside of New York City per se. So because of the relationship with Felipe and Crossbridge and Terry Geiger and these guys, they came to him and said, hey, let's pilot this thing in Miami. That's when I came on board. And Felipe and I had already been gathering with church planners and leaders for a couple of years, just asking the question, how does the gospel inform and transform the way that we do leadership? And so it was kind of a natural thing for us to be able to say, hey, we want to see the gospel movement in Miami, but we know that a piece of that is training and coaching church planners. So that's how City to City Miami was born. And so we recruited, I think we started with 7 guys for our first incubator. And then, through that process, just really learned a lot, really discovered what the contextualized version of incubator would look like here in Miami. We spent a lot of time learning from the guys up in New York. Slowly, City to City in Chicago was launched. A City to City in Los Angeles was launched, in Phoenix, San Francisco, now Seattle. And so more and more of urban city centers all throughout North America are launching. And Miami just happened to be kind of the first one outside of New York that we're kind of, spearheading and learning and in communication with these guys. So it really is a privilege to be a part of this kind of a work. City to City is an interesting network. We're not a network that you as a church planner join, maybe like the Acts 29 network or a denominational network like the Send network with NAM. We really are a network to the networks. We work with everyone. Our primary desire is to come alongside the work of the church, the work of denominations, the work of networks in a global city, and say, how can we partner? How can we serve to advance the gospel in that area? Obviously, the bread and butter of what we do is the training and the coaching, and the incubator is kind of our, flagship way that we serve church planners through this 2-year process. What I want to do is I want to see if this is going to work. I'm not sure. This is the first time I'm doing this, but I want to show you a clip. Let's see if I can get this to work here. I want to show you a clip here by Tim Keller. So if you can't hear the video properly, just give me a thumbs down, and we'll try to do this a different way.
And God makes a fascinating argument. He says to Jonah, Jonah, look at this great city of Nineveh. There's 120,000 people there who don't know their right hand from their left. Shouldn't I have compassion on them? See, God is looking at the sheer massiveness of Nineveh and the masses of people. And he's saying to Jonah, Jonah, if you care about people, then you're going to care about cities, because there's so many people there. That argument, which is a very emotional argument on God's part, resonates with me. We need churches everywhere there's people, but the people of the world are moving into cities much faster than the church is. And we want to be part of a movement that is planting churches in the great global cities of the world. And there's never been a more crucial time for this. It's estimated that 4 million people a month are actually moving to the great global cities of the world, which means every 2 months, that's 8 million people, which is another Bangkok. This is going to take more than just what I can do. This is going to take thousands and thousands of Christians around the world who are partnering with us in order to make this happen. It's our hope you will learn what God is doing in the great global cities of the world, what part we, city to city, are playing, and what part you may be called.
So it doesn't take much for us to look around South Florida. And, when I say, even though the name of our, what we're called the city to city Miami, the reality is, we want to come alongside church planners in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach and the surrounding area. And it doesn't take much if you've lived here for any period of time to see that this really is a global region. South Florida has a major global context. Oftentimes Miami is referred to as the capital of Latin America. And when you look at, everything that's going on from commerce to the diversity of people from literally all over the world that are moving to this region, we have to realize that there is not only a huge opportunity, but a responsibility for us to bring the gospel to this region, and to do it in a way that I think is healthy and helpful. One of the things that we believe is important for gospel movement here in South Florida is that it really starts with your story. It starts with your story and how it's being impacted by the gospel story. We cannot plant healthy gospel-centered churches if you as a pastor, if you as a church planner are not healthy, and if you are not growing in your own gospel story as well. I mean, that's a little bit of my story. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor, and I followed in his footsteps. Admittedly, early on, I kind of went begrudgingly into ministry, but I soon found my niche in ministry, and at 28 years old was burned out, was frustrated, and I walked away from the church, and I walked away from full-time ministry. And it was at that time that a friend of mine reintroduced to me the relevance of the gospel for me as a Christian. Because for me, the gospel wasn't relevant for me personally, other than it was the message that I communicated to those that were lost. I didn't realize the gospel was also for me as a believer. I thought it was just for unbelievers. And so it's kind of like that phrase that Tim Keller will say often. You'll hear him say, he says, the gospel is not just the ABCs of Christianity. It's the A to Z, or it's not just the door, it's the path. And I had realized for the first time that grace was not just available to me for my justification. it was also available to me for my sanctification. And so for the first time in my life as a pastor, I came to God and I prayed this prayer. I said, God, I don't desire you. And I realized for the first time that you still love me anyways, and that there's no amount of performance, there's no amount of good works, there's no amount of things that I can do to prove myself worthy to you in ministry that can get you to love me more. You love me, as much as you could possibly love me, in spite of my failures, in spite of my successes too. And I personally rediscovered the gospel, and it freed me. It freed me to do ministry. It freed me to be a pastor in a way like I'd never thought was possible. And so for us at City to City, that's foundational. That's key in all of our training for church planning and for city gospel movement. We could talk about the best models, the latest models. We could talk, reform theology or all these different nuances that are important and matter. But at the end of the day, it's really about how the gospel story is impacting your story. And for us, that matters a lot. I want to talk to you a little bit about what the Incubator actually is. The Incubator's our key 2-year program to serve, train, and develop church planners in South Florida. The Incubator is also delivered to church planners in target cities through local trainers. And so that piece of local trainers matters to us. We will bring facilitators in from other cities, from New York, from some of our other existing cities here in North America. But we also, our desire is to have local trainers heavily involved in that training, mainly because of the contextualization piece. Each learning module addresses the specific needs of urban planters, including skills in thinking theologically about ministry and growth in the various areas of urban ministry. Church planners go through the program during the critical phase of launching their congregations, and they get practical help on writing their action plan, the philosophy of ministry, crucial ministry development, and preaching, among other topics. Ideally, this training is accompanied by coaching to encourage the planners to perform to the maximum extent of their giftedness. And so coaching is not mandatory, but we do offer it. We have several coaches in the region that can be available to you. But it's something that you would have to opt in and sign up for that. Let me just go through with you a little. We have 16 modules that we teach throughout the 2-year program. And I'm just going to briefly give you the titles, and then I'm going to actually show you in just a moment where you can access the actual PDF that you can download to read more deeply. The first module is called Gospel Theology. Then we have the personal life of the leader, culture and contextualization, evangelistic networking, missional ecclesiology, grace renewal, discipleship and leadership development, kingdom-centered prayer. Okay, that's year 1. We'll cover those 8 modules. And then in year 2, leading with the right people, leading through others, preaching. And then we actually have 2 modules on preaching. One is finding and proclaiming Christ. The other one is applying Christ to the heart. Leading through difficulty, corporate renewal dynamics, leading to the next level, and leadership through the organization. And one of the things that I think you'll find very interesting about these modules is that you're not going to walk away from these from this cohort each time we gather. Probably what's going to happen is you're going to have like 10 to 15 guys from different churches in the group. They're going to be different denominational backgrounds, maybe even some slight theological variances. You're not all going to leave with the same model. A lot of you guys are going to have different models for what you're doing. But in a sense, this is principle-based learning, principle-based training, that you're going to develop your own model based upon some of these key theological, really what we have is a theological vision that we're trying to present to you that then you're going to take, and it's going to shape your model. It's going to shape based upon your context. And I'm going to show you in just a minute, because I know you might have questions about, specifically, some of these will, stick out to you more than others. If you love to preach, you're going to really love the preaching modules. If you're more of an evangelistic guy, the evangelistic networking one might stick out to you. But I'll show you where you can grab a PDF that's going to give you all of the specifics about that. Now, who's going to be teaching these modules? Now, I'm going to show you just a quick list of some of the facilitators that will be involved in helping to facilitate these modules. It's not exhaustive. Some years, some of these people won't be available, and some years we'll have other people that aren't even on this list yet. But for example, Tim Keller is actually going to be with us for the first module, which is coming up here in October. And so he'll be one of our facilitators. Robert Guerrero will be with us a few times a year, a few times throughout the 2 years, actually, throughout this year cohort. He's the vice president of Redeemer City to City in New York. He's in Miami actually quite a bit. He works with Latino church planners, but he's also kind of the catalyst and in charge of all the city to city stuff happening in New York City. Robert Elkin is the incubator director there. In New York, they're actually running like 5 incubators at a time. And so he's the guy that kind of oversees that. You guys might know him. He's one of our local guys, Rick Hunter, who runs the City Church Project here. You know, I joke around that Rick Hunter's like the godfather of church planting around here in South Florida. Guy's been at it longer than most of us. Felipe Assis is the pastor of Crossbridge here in Miami. He's also one of the co-directors for City to City North America. So he's working with leaders not only in Miami, but New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Seattle, San Francisco. I'll be one of the facilitators as well, and then David Lopez. And then you guys know Brad Jones. He's here on the call. He's with City Church Pompano. He's a church planner. He's a pastor. And we're excited. And we want to keep growing that list of local facilitators here in the region. I'll give you just briefly what the schedule is going to look like. In the past, we used to host the incubator once a month for a whole day, and you would do that 8 times a year. We're changing that up a little bit because we realize time, there's a weird thing with South Florida and people's time. Once a month kind of feels like once a week. And so what we've decided to do is do quarterly retreats. So we're going to do 2-day, 1-night retreats, 8 retreats for over the period of 2 years. And at each retreat, we'll cover 2 modules. The first retreat coming up is October 2nd and 3rd. And it's going to be hosted at the Ritz-Carlton in Key Biscayne. There are some requirements to be a part of this. It's important to us that as a church planner, you're assessed. And so assessment assures that you're called and prepared for the journey of church planning. If you've already been assessed by your denomination or network, we accept that assessment, or we can help you get assessment through one of our partners. Coaching, you know, being a part of the incubator cohort and learning all the 60 modules is not enough. We think that church planners need coaches to help them take what they know and put it into action. And so coaching is a vital part of your success. What I will say is that coaching, you know, we don't require, it's not mandatory to stay in the incubator, but we do highly suggest that you invest in coaching. And then one of the cool things is because we're doing the retreat style thing where it's once a quarter, there's plenty of time in between to get that coaching in place. And then finances. The incubator does cost money. It costs $4,000 for the entire 2-year program, but generous donors are underwriting a majority of this cost for you. So every incubator participant immediately receives a 50% scholarship. We have an easy payment plan of $100 a month to help. Some scholarships may be available for further need on a case-by-case basis. And so for those that are ready to apply for the incubator, they would just go to citytocitymiami.com/incubator. Let me just do something here real quick. I'm going to pull out of the screen here. And then I want to just show you, this is the page. Do you guys see this page that I'm showing you here? Good. This is the application page or incubator registration. It's not that long, you know, just some basic information, name of your church plant, church website, kind of a couple of questions here. This is really the first step. You would go here. It's under citycitymiami. This is the main page, citycitymiami.com/incubator. And there's an application link at the bottom here. There's a bunch of, you know, answers to questions that you might have here. If you know somebody that is thinking about church planning, but they're not really sure yet, there is a link here called self-assessment. Self-assessment is just a short form that they can fill out that will give them some ideas of, you know, whether or not church planting is for them. Also on this main page, you'll see that there's a link here for what the training looks like. And when you click on this link, it's going to bring you to this document here. that's going to show you the list of the modules, descriptions for each module. So for example, the first module, Gospel Theology, this module focuses on understanding how the work of Jesus Christ changes everything we are and do as individuals, as a community, and as ministers of God's grace, as opposed to just trying harder to apply biblical principles to my life. Though the gospel is the life-giving message of redemption that we always preach, as well as the dynamic that causes ongoing redemption in our lives and communities, few pastors understand how to consistently apply it to their life and work. And so then it gives you some competency outcomes, and you'll have competency outcomes for each one of these modules to give you a better understanding of what it is that you're looking at, what we're looking to teach, and what you'll walk away with. And so it's pretty robust. I mean, it's going to give you a lot of material to sort of process through and go through. But the first step would be to go here to the application and just kind of fill that out and express your interest that way. So questions, Q&A. Let me unmute you guys here. And let's see if you have any questions.
Jesse, you should say on the retreat that there's space. My daughter's yelling at me now. Sorry.
That's cool.
That there's space for their wives or
yes.
another person.
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad. We definitely on the retreat, and I should have included that in the slide. Thank you for reminding me. We would like your spouses to participate. We believe that your spouse is the primary stakeholder of the church plant with you. Now, regardless of I want to be clear about something. I know that in the church planting world, there's two camps. There's the camp where the pastor's wife is also the pastor. And then there's church planners where the wife is not the church planner or the pastor. She's just, more of a complementarian view where she's a helper and maybe she does children's ministry or maybe she doesn't do any, maybe she doesn't have a specific role in the church plant, and that's okay. We're not trying to pit one against the other, but what we are saying is that whatever the function is, the fact is you're married, and as you're planting the church, whether it's together or however it is, she's a key stakeholder, and we think it would be very important for her to understand the training and the information so that you guys can support each other in that process. We also think it's important because of the fellowship that the wives can have with one another. So we want to invite them at no additional cost. We want to invite them to come and be a part of each of the retreats. Now, if for some reason your wife cannot attend, she cannot commit to the training and to the retreats long term, the space is available for you to bring a team member. You might have an associate pastor, an elder, somebody that like, this is a guy who's helping me kind of with the church plant. You can bring them as well, or not as well as with your wife, but either your spouse or that person, bring them along with you for the training. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Right. And would our wives participate in all of the aspects of the incubator? So in all of the sessions?
Here's what I would say. They're going to participate in 75%, about 75 to 80% of the training. There are some aspects of the training that may not be relevant to them. For example, the preaching. There may be some wives who they're never going to preach. And let's say you're a more complementarian reformed church plant, and like, yeah, that's not my wife's role. Then we will have alternative sessions for them at the retreat. So my wife, for example, we come from a complementarian perspective. My wife does not preach, but my wife loves other pastors' wives. There are other pastors' wives that are involved in this, where there would be a different session, a different training, a different opportunity for them at that same time that you're going through the preaching module.
Okay.
Good questions. Thanks, Brad, for bringing that up. What other questions do you guys have?
What about, I'm just thinking out loud, but because I don't know the timing. Like, I have a desire to plant a church, but I don't know the timing. Could be 4 years, could be starting a small group in my house that becomes a church. I don't know. I just have a desire. But and I've done it before, but always trying to sharpen my sword, so to speak. But So, but my thought was, what is like the commitment for, like, say you start and you figure out like 3/4 or 2/4 halfway through, you say, hey, I can't do the next year. Are you still financially committed to the whole 2-year program, or how does that all work if you need to drop out halfway through?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't want anybody dropping out, but we realize that circumstances come up, things happen that you can't follow through. Yeah, I mean, we're not going to hold you to any kind of financial commitment, you know. I mean, this is not a moneymaker for us. I mean, we're not trying to make a profit here. So at the end of the day, if something comes up and you got to pivot, that's fine. But we certainly want to make, this is why we kind of go through the process of like, you have to apply. You don't just get to go to the incubator because you want to. You have to apply to it first, and we have to have a conversation to make sure it's the right fit and it's the right time for you. So I would say, Dwayne, if you're not sure if you're going to church plant, within the next year, I would say, hey, let's have a conversation about that first, just to make sure that it's the right fit. The reason is because we want the dynamic of the church planners that are in the group together to be the right dynamic. If you're 4 years out from church planting and maybe you have a guy that's like 5 years into his church plant, that's going to be you guys are going to be in two very different places in the stage of your life, and there's going to be a tension there that's not going to be as healthy as possible. We're trying to bring that dynamic a little bit tighter where guys are kind of in the same stage of life. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, totally.
That's not a hard and fast rule. That's why we need to talk about it and kind of figure out what's going to make sense for you and for us.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. But Dwayne, let me just encourage you. Go ahead and apply. Let's have that conversation. Maybe it's not this round, maybe it's the next round, but at least you've applied, and at least you're in the queue if you do that, if you go through that process.
That sounds cool. I'm just going to talk to my wife. I went to Cuba a couple of weeks ago with Christ Fellowship's mission trip, and I was like checking out the church plants there, and I'm like, man, it was like refreshing my burden, after planning in Chicago a couple of times. So I was like, it was pretty exciting.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, not to detract here, but Felipe and I were talking about bringing Joby down for a conference.
Cool.
Didn't you plant with Joby?
Yeah, or Job. Mark Job.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, actually, I mean, he just texted me a couple days ago because I had my first granddaughter, so it's pretty cool. But yeah, I was planted from New Life out of Chicago a couple times. I helped with a couple of locations.
That's awesome. That's cool.
Hey, Jesse, I've been involved in a cohort before with Acts 29. Interested in this. I'm wondering if this incubator is particularly contextualized for South Florida and if it would be helpful for me from that perspective.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's one of the major benefits of the incubator is because you are in the room with facilitators that are local. You're in the room with other church planners that are local. I love Acts 29. There's probably not any network or training out there that I don't love or think that there's value. The challenge, though, is that most of the training from other networks is that they put you in a room and it's like guys from other parts of the country, or their teaching is more modalic. It's like here's what you need to do. That's not horrible, but I think what's best is that you're in the room with people kind of wrestling through the dynamics of like, so for you, it'd be like, I'm in Fort Lauderdale, I'm in Broward County. Like, what are the dynamics for Broward that are unique to Broward? And to have a couple other guys in the room that you can wrestle through that with, and take some of this theological vision that you're forming, that's going to set you up for the next 20 years, as opposed to, maybe a model that, it works today, but it may not work tomorrow, or guys are just kind of sharing like, well, here's what works for me in the Midwest. And you're like, hey, blessings, brother. Love to hear what's happening in the Midwest or up north or out in California or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, I'm in Broward. And one of the things we contend with in South Florida is that South Florida is just a weird beast. I can't find anywhere in the United States that's like South Florida. Everybody's like, oh yeah. I'm like, no, like, I mean, and Miami even more so. Miami is even more of a weird, kind of a place to do church planting. But South Florida in general just has these very unique. We just have a great need for contextualization here, right? And I find that the best way for that to happen is to be in a room with local guys to wrestle through those implications together. And that's what you get. You get local guys, local facilitators wrestling through that stuff.
When's the deadline to apply?
That's a good question. We don't really have a deadline, but the first retreat is coming up October 2nd and 3rd. So I mean, the sooner the better.
Okay. Yeah, it's great information. I think that's about it for me in terms of questions. I'm pretty sure we can follow up. I'm looking forward to looking through the material a little bit and making applications, seeing if this can be done.
Awesome.
Thank
Brad,
you so much, Jesse.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thank you, Winston. Thank you, Dwayne. Brad, do you have any other thoughts or comments that you want to throw in here?
No. I mean, just if you guys are connected with some of the other church planters in the area, I've got a couple messages that I sent out yesterday. I have like 3 or 4 guys right now that I'm just working on trying to get them to connect with this. You said this is going to be recorded and available, right?
Yep. I'm going to do another live call on Tuesday morning, assuming there's no hurricane. I mean, if things are okay, I'll, if there's Wi-Fi, if there's electricity, I'll do this again Tuesday morning.
Okay.
But, obviously if there's a storm and we can't log in, we won't, but yeah, this is being recorded. I'll go ahead and make this available.
Okay. Yeah. I honestly want to sit down with a couple other guys and actually watch this with them and kind of walk through a couple things. So
awesome. All right, guys. Well, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions.
Sounds
All
cool.
right,
Thank
Jesse.
you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Incredible. This stuff is gold, guys. So.
All right, guys. Take care. Have a great day. Stay safe in the storm.
For sure.
All right,
Thank you.
you too.
All right, take
Blessings,
care.
guys.
Bye.